Hello and welcome to coverage of round 3 of Grand Prix Montreal. Maria Bertholdi and Reed Duke in the booth with you here. Gabriel Sang on the left side of your screen versus Dylan Murphy, both players starting things out undefeated. Gabe, of course, 3 Pro Tour top 8s we talked about just a little while ago. He quit Magic after that Pro Tour win because he's like, you know what, I did it, achieved the goal, and he's only now just getting back into it. So let's see if he needs to knock any rust off or if he feels pretty good right out of the gates. Small miss is going to kick things off for him.
I love to see a player like Gabe Sang here at Grand Prix Montreal, just, you know, a player with a long, rich history with Magic. He's very excited to be playing, and he's confident, too. I talked to him on my off round just a second ago, and he's happy with his deck. He's ready to go. He's been practicing a lot, so I'm really excited to see him, not just in this round, but maybe over the course of the whole weekend if he can put together a good run.
Cool. Well, he's starting things off all right. Beacon Bolt in hand, I happen to notice as well. Running Is It colors, it looks. We've got a little Grixis action going on Dylan Murphy's side of the battlefield. There's a Pitiless Gorgon, 2/2 Death Touch. Capture Sphere of the draw for Sang.
Now we have deck lists for this round in front of us, and I can tell you that Dylan Murphy is playing a mostly Dimir deck, but he's touching into red, as you can see from the basic mountain, just for a couple extra removal spells. So this looks to be both these players having the types of decks that we've liked so far on camera. The blue-based decks with good removal spells, card filtering, and the decks that aren't going to stagnate in the late game. They're not going to get brick-walled if there's something that they can't attack through.
Pitiless Gorgon swinging in here for a couple of points of damage will knock Sang down to 18. His play last turn was a Muse Drake that when it enters battlefield draws a card. Here's a Leapfrog from Dylan Murphy. Definitely a card that you see more in Is It centric colors. Can get flying if you cast an instant or sorcery. Space stats 3/1, not too shabby. But Muse Drake, so great, Reed.
Yeah, Muse Drake's really nice because you can see on this board that Gabe plays it. He's going to pick up his card right away, and it's threatening to trade with something that actually might be a problematic card. So if he can actually just get a clean 2-for-1 by trading Muse Drake off for Leapfrog, that's exactly the type of exchange that adds up to you winning over the course of a middle or a long-term game.
Lots of good tools in Gabe's hand, too, it looks like. Capture Sphere, I see in there. Unexplained Disappearance. Command the Storm. Nice.
The first time we watched an Is It deck, Maria, you said you never really get an easy turn with
No,
Is It. You always
no.
have 500 options available to you. You got to think about it. Am I going to take an aggressive route? Am I going to draw some more cards?
Is my opponent just dead here?
Yeah, that's a good thing to always check, even starting here on turn 5, because you never know with Is It. You can a lot of times put together some big turns, removing opposing blockers, triggering abilities.
Here's some respect for that Pitiless Gorgon here with Command the Storm taking it down. Ooh, Murmuring Mystic, the follow-up play for Dylan.
Murmuring Mystic is one of my favorite cards in Guilds of Ravnica so far. The stats on the Mystic alone make it really nice. It's a good blocker, and importantly, it's resilient to a lot of the red-based removal. And additionally, that ability to create 1/1 bird tokens every time you play an instant or sorcery spell, that gives you such a long-term advantage. It means you can protect yourself if your opponent's sending an army of attackers, even evasive creatures at you. And if the game slows down, you can just amass your own army and win like that. Made even more powerful by the fact that many of the instances of sorceries in this format have Jumpstart, and the other ones have Surveil, which can find you more action and keep the gas in the tank.
I want to ask a question about Pitiless Gorgon sitting in the bin right now. How do you like this card, Reed?
It's a fine card. I was actually a little bit surprised to see it in Dylan Murphy's deck since, well, you know, according to the colors of the border, it's a black and green card. Really, you can cast it off of black mana, but black 1 can be sometimes a fairly demanding mana cost in a 3-color deck. But it's just a totally fine card. Death Touch, a very powerful ability, particularly in sealed deck, where you get these board stalls, you need to block a large opposing creature out of a Selesnya or a Golgari deck. So yeah, I got absolutely nothing against Pitiless Gorgon. It's not exciting, but bread and butter card.
Beacon Bolt here from Tsang on Murphy's Leapfrog. In comes the Muse Drake. And Beacon Bolt, another in hand too, is going to start to get exponentially better.
Wow. So I was about to say that was a fairly aggressive play for Tsang to pull the trigger on Beacon Bolt. Normally, a card like Leapfrog that you can brick wall with your flying blocker.
Right.
You might just leave it in play and save your removal spell for something. But you mentioned that he's got another Beacon Bolt in hand, which means actually 4 uses of this card. So he doesn't have to be selective whatsoever, and that's one of the power of that's part of the power of this jumpstart mechanic, and is it in general.
Muse Drake in for another 1. Murphy at 18. How about a Murmuring Mystic of my own? Says Tsang. Hits the table, and wow, that Mystic seems great in his deck.
Yeah, so now it's a contest of who can play more spells, who can get ahead on resources.
Might look a little bit like Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds in here pretty soon.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, Beacon Bolt with Jumpstart on it. I mean, just on face value, it's an excellent card. But just being able to Jumpstart it again is so good. And they stack so nicely.
Yep, and we talked about how many of the Is It cards are templated so that they additionally count instants and sorceries in your exile zone. So that means you can guilt-free jumpstart your cards and still make sure your Beacon Bolts are fully powered later on.
All right, there's a Chamber Sentry for Dylan Murphy. And a Hired Poisoner. So he's going to be able to remove counters from that Sentry if he chooses to be able to deal damage to any target.
Yeah, that's a nice one. And actually, Dylan Murphy touching into 4 colors, so he could potentially cast Chamber Sentry as a 4/4. But this is Guilds of Ravnica's version of Walking Ballista. A little bit less powerful since you can't recharge it once it's in play. Yeah, but a creature that can shoot down low toughness creatures is looking pretty good in this Murmuring Mystic battle.
Absolutely. Be interesting to see if Tsang wants to get that Chamber Sentry off the battlefield.
Oh, and very nicely done, by the way, from Dylan Murphy. He's also got 1 Selesnya Guildgate. So hypothetically, if we saw a game that went on indefinitely, 20 turns, 25 turns, he would eventually assemble all 5 colors of mana and be able to rebuy that as a sort of super long game inevitability plan.
Well, I hope just for excitement factor that happens. That's pretty cool. All right, so we did see the second Beacon Bolt fired off at the Chamber Sentry, getting a bird token off that Murmuring Mystic for Tsang there. Muse Drake continuing to pack in for 1 damage. Dylan Murphy down to 17, and Tsang will pass a turn right on back over. But Dylan Murphy, lots of tools in hand for him as well. I see a Command the Storm.
Right, you notice by this point in the game that Tsang has drawn a couple more lands than Dylan Murphy, which allowed him to come out more smoothly and develop his board, but it means when the dust settles, it's Dylan Murphy who's still going to have the full hand, and in the course of the next 2 or 3 turns, he may be able to leverage that, particularly in the Murmuring Mystic battle.
Here's Deadly Visit taking down Tsang's Murmuring Mystic, bird token for Murphy. And we're going to get to Surveil too. Ooh, a Thief of Sanity and the gate.
Yeah, sadly, the Thief of Sanity is going to be hard to slip through the cracks here with all those Beacon Bolts still in Tsang's graveyard.
True.
But that is an extremely powerful card that Dylan Murphy's got to be excited to have access to over the course of the day.
All right, so he's going to leave them both on top, in fact, and he will be able to rebuy that Chamber Sentry. There's a look at Thief of Sanity. Little nod to Nightveil Spectre, was it?
Yeah, Nightveil Spectre, the original Hypnotic Spectre, which of course deprived the opponents of resources, whereas Thief of Sanity gives you more resources. But this is just a great card, and one of the key subtleties about it is that even if the Thief of Sanity leaves play, you could still cast those cards that you exiled.
Yeah. Muse Drake and 2 birds trade off here on the attack from Tsang. Murphy down to 16.
So far, Maria, I think the key detail in this game is that 5th point of toughness on Murmuring Mystic.
Yeah.
Both players had it in play. Gabe Tsang with the really nice draw access to 2 Beacon Bolts, but he hasn't been able to get them up to 5 damage. So that means that while he's been unable to kill Dylan Murphy's Murmuring Mystic, or at least unable to do so in a convenient way, Murphy had the black-based removal, Deadly Visit, able to take out the Mystic out a one-for-one basis, and that has been a big part of his advantage now. So it's just a matter of if he can overwhelm those 2 remaining Beacon Bolts in Gabe Sag's graveyard, then he'll be able to get ahead in this game in the long run.
Making for some really interesting magic, too, having Jump Start just sitting around available potentially. Fire Urchin was a play last turn for Sang. 1/3 Trampler gets +1/+0 when you cast an instant or sorcery until end of turn.
Yeah, not too impressive on this board. The one nice thing is that Dylan really doesn't want to block with Murmuring Mystic. He doesn't want to put that into combat for fear that Beacon Bolt would take care of it after in the second main phase.
Sure.
So Fire Urchin may be able to attack, but any sort of low impact creature like that, you know that Gabe is going to be thinking about, do I want to deploy this or do I want to keep it in my hand as fodder for my jumpstart spells?
Yeah, and that's a really big question you've got to ask yourself pretty continually in a guild like Is It. Erratic Cyclops here, the play for Sang. It's an 08, another Trampler that gets +X/+0 based on the CMC, convert mana cost of your instant or sorcery, and Dylan Murphy is having none of it. Statue sends it to the graveyard. Gosh, Murmuring Mystic's so great. Not only am I killing your thing, I'm also getting a bird. I played against Erratic Cyclops in my very first draft, which was actually at Worlds when we were testing a little bit before the tournament. And a couple of times I'm like, oh, they're just bluffing me. I'll let it through. Not good.
You're attacking me for 0?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll take it. That never seems to work out well.
No. Lava Coil takes care of the Muse Drake.
Wow, I'm
That's
jealous of Dylan Murphy's deck here. He's got everything. He's got all the colors. He's got all the removal spells. A couple really nice rares. The Murmuring Mystic in full swing here, and he's really taken over this game that looked bad for him at the start.
Quasi-Duplicate was a draw for Sang, and it's just there's just nothing you want to duplicate here on this board.
Right, because keeping in mind Quasi-Duplicate only targets your own creatures, so against a removal-heavy deck like Dylan Murphy's, that can sometimes be a little bit inconvenient.
Is it something you would consider sideboarding out after seeing all of his removal? Or is it too good?
Well, it's not out of the question. In fact, in the Team Series Finals, which was Team Sealed deck format, we actually left Quasi-Duplicate in our sideboard because our blue deck was very controlling with very few creatures. So we thought a situation like this might come up too often where you're a little bit on the back foot, you have to trade off your creatures, and you don't have a good window to duplicate something. So although it is a really powerful card, it is a little bit situational, and you could consider it. But I would sort of use that technique with caution.
Sure.
I would be more inclined to keep it just on raw power level.
Capture Sphere will lock down the Thief of Sanity, which was about to get out of control as Dylan Murphy had dealt with all of the flyers available to Gabriel Sang. And of course, don't forget those Beacon Bolts.
Yeah, you may be asking yourself at home, did Gabe just forget about those Beacon Bolts? Why is he not using them? But what's going on here is he's really trying to hold on for dear life to find a 5th instant or sorcery so that he can kill the Murmuring Mystic. That's why you saw him use Capture Sphere on the Thief of Sanity instead of flashing back one of those Beacon Bolts.
Demir Informant here would maybe help with that.
Yeah, he may find it. He may be able to bin a 5th instant.
He's got a Fresh Face Recruit and a Capture Sphere, so neither of those are going to do it.
Yeah, and Capture Sphere, woefully ineffective against Murmuring Mystic. So it's brutal. The combination of high toughness and the non-combat triggered ability just makes that card so hard to deal with. So many of the removal spells are ineffective against it.
You know, it kind of reminds me of Drakehaven a little bit.
Yes, definitely. Any repeatable token maker is so powerful in sealed deck. Murmuring Mystic, certainly one of the cards that I'm crossing my fingers to open if I'm playing Guild of Ravnica sealed.
Okay, we've got a Quasi-Duplicate on the Demir Informant of all things, but Artful Takedown is going to cancel that order.
Geez, and this might be the nail in the coffin, Maria, because
wow.
Sang is not out of it. He still has a lot of good weapons in his graveyard, but he's out of cards in hand. So that means the best he can do is play one spell per turn unless he's able to pick up something like a Chemister's Insight, something to refill his hand. But the way this board is spiraling out of control, the way Dylan Murphy is able to cast a relevant spell and make a bird token every single turn cycle, it means that Sang is not going to be able to keep pace if he's only playing one spell per turn.
Gabriel Sang down to 11 life after that attack from those birds.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, Chamber Sentry's coming back.
Amazing, amazing.
Sang going to take a read of this here. Yes, if you play Wooburg. Goes back to the hand.
Dylan Murphy, he did it. This is the deck that that we dream of.
Reed's ready to go here. He's like, excuse me, I have to leave the booth and play Dylan Murphy's deck.
And if the trend that we've seen so far of the slower blue decks being really effective in sealed holds true, Dylan has built a deck that's really strong in these slow mirror matches. We talked about the inevitability of the Chamber Sentry. We're seeing it right now. But additionally, just so many removal spells, so much power built into this 5-color deck that he's in good shape, and he's up a game here against Gabe Sang.
Dylan Murphy takes it down first of the game here in this match versus Gabriel Sang, and that, you are not wrong, Reed. His deck looks sweet. The question we have to ask ourselves, though, is at what cost? So how many guild gates does he have access to?
All of them.
Oh, okay, well, that's great.
He's got all 6 guild gates in his deck, plus 1 Overgrown Tomb that he had in play at the end of that game. So 7 mana fixers. He decided to not play with any of his lockets, which that's a question that I'm eager to see different players' takes on. I know some people have been liking the lockets. They're willing to play 2 or 3. Other people say no, it's a little too slow. Dylan has not played with any of his lockets.
You know what? I don't think I've seen one on the table yet this weekend, which we're still, early here in the tournament, but it's kind of unusual.
Yeah, that may be true. Sang, on the other hand, just really conservative mana base. 1 is at Guildgate, all basic lands, 2-color deck.
Wow, that just went so perfectly for Dylan. It's times like that when I'm like, I'm sure if I had built this deck, I would just be stuck on only 2 colors of mana or something. Taking a look, players heading into their sideboards here, getting ready for game number 2. And that's something I hear a lot of pros talk about, is the importance of sideboarding in these kinds of limited matches that a lot of people just don't take the time to do.
Yeah, exactly. So in sealed decks, sometimes it's even possible to completely change gears. You might go from your controlling Dimir deck to your Boros deck if the situation calls for it, if you think you can take your opponent by surprise. So that always makes it challenging. You want to sideboard against the cards that you saw in game 1, but also not unbalance yourself too much that you could get caught by surprise if your opponent shifts something around or even just has a different texture of draw than they had in the first game.
Right.
But you can bet that Gabe Sang is looking at the mana base of Dylan Murphy, the late game power, all the removal spells, and he's thinking, let me set myself up to play a long game where card advantage is going to matter.
Okay, Gabe Sang, 3 Pro Tour top 8s and a win. He's been away from Magic for 13 years, ever since he won a Pro Tour. One of his teammates for that Team Pro Tour win, by the way, David Rude, is sitting next to him in the feature match area. We might get a chance to peek in on that match. We'll see yet later this round. But that's kind of cool, sitting next to your old teammate.
Yeah, that's
13 years.
Great. So many years down the road, who would think?
Well, if GP comes back into town, you got to play, right?
Yeah, I think so.
You never quit Magic. Not really, Reed.
No.
And by the way, if you do, it knows. We've had several examples of this recently of somebody saying, you know what, I'm going to take a break, and then, doing super well at a Grand Prix or something like that. In fact, winning it.
Yeah, I've stopped shedding any tears when people tell me they're quitting Magic.
You're like, okay.
I take the I'll believe it when I see it. All right, sure, man, enjoy your vacation. I'll see you in 6 months.
Yeah, right. I'm really excited too to be spending more time on Ravnica across the next 3 sets. I love Ravnica. Return to Ravnica was the first Magic set I ever played.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, so it's like going back to visit my old friend, the first set that introduced me to the game.
Mm-hmm. We have some throwback cards, a couple of really important reprints from previous Ravnica sets, like Goblin Electromancer.
Oh, sure, yep.
Like Sky Knight Legionnaire.
Oh, yeah, Sky Knight Legionnaire. My first pre-release was actually the set after Return to Ravnica, and I was Boros. I went to a midnight pre-release in Austin, Texas at Pat's Games, and there was hundreds of people playing there, so it got done at like 5 in the morning. That was my first pre-release experience.
That's cool. I mean, you
really
love to
awesome.
see people just so excited about Magic to be playing with the new cards at 5 in the morning.
Oh, yeah.
The night they come out.
It was an epic first pre-release. All right, here we go. Taking a look at our opening hands for game number 2. Gabe Sang versus Dylan Murphy. Dylan says Demir with red, but...
That's just because we don't have enough space to write all the colors that Dylan's playing with.
The truth of the matter is he's playing all 5.
Yeah, now he doesn't have any white cards. He just has one Selesnya Guildgate for his Guardian of the Guild. Sorry, Chamber Sentry.
Chamber Sentry, thank you.
It's
I was trying to remember too.
Sunburst card. And he doesn't have any mono green cards, but we did see him use Status Statue to good effect, and that's a great card to splash for. In fact, any of the split cards, because often, okay, the worst case scenario, I haven't found my mana of my splash color. At least I can just play half of my split card.
Sure.
But then when things go well and you actually have your black and your green mana, then you can cast Statue, which is a very powerful effect to have access to.
Ooh, Dylan Murphy stuck on 2 lands here.
So we should note here, Maria, Gabe Sang lost the first game. He chose to draw. He put Dylan Murphy on the play, and it's working out well because Dylan stumbling a little bit, missing a land drop. And you did mention the somewhat greedy mana base that Selesnya Guildgate isn't casting much in his deck, and he's found now red and blue mana, but not black yet.
Whisper Agent here for Gabe gets a Surveil. And we're going to put that counter in the graveyard. Here's a look at Whisper Agent 3-2 with Flash. The Surveil on this card just pushes it up there, just a teeny little notch higher for me. But I'm never not playing it in Demir colors, probably. Erratic Cyclops shuffled to the front of his hand, too. We saw it hit the table last game, but it didn't really get to do anything. It was immediately dealt with from Dylan Murphy.
Pretty interesting that Sang would surveil Sinister Sabotage into the graveyard, because you think slow matchup, I'm not necessarily behind on the board, I want access to this counterspell, but what this indicates to me is that he's really looking to curve out. Maybe he wants to hit his land drops, maybe he wants to push the advantage that something like this Erratic Cyclops is going to provide, and he doesn't want to sit back on counterspell mana and let Dylan Murphy draw out of the land drop, out of the land screw. Instead, he would rather just make this a quick win and go to game 3 with a good amount of time left on the clock.
He may also have a Beacon Bolt, and there it is. 1's all I need to do to this Leapfrog.
Yeah, that's right. Unlike Scry, Surveil, you get this subtle advantage anytime you put cards in your graveyard, because there are so many things in Guilds of Ravnica that benefit you from having a large graveyard. There's Jumpstart, there's Undergrowth, and a lot of these Izzet cards like Beacon Bolt benefit you for having more instants and sorceries in your graveyard.
Wow, look at this. Status is saving the Leapfrog's life there, giving it +1/+1 until end of turn.
Yep, that's a nice one. Beacon Bolt could be a little tricky if you haven't seen cards like this before, but it deals damage to target creature equal to the number of instant sorceries in your graveyard and in exile. It doesn't count itself, and the reason for that is when you cast a spell, you resolve the text in order that it's written, and then the last thing that happens is the spell goes to the graveyard. So it'll never count itself when it's on the stack.
Really important to know. Inescapable Blaze, I believe, was a draw there for saying, here's a Piston Fist Cyclops. Kind of a hallmark card of Izzet.
Yeah, so having both of these Cyclopses in play puts him in a really primed position for any time he's able to cast an instant or sorcery on his own turn. He can chip in for quite a lot of damage. And especially if you think about those instant sorceries potentially removing blockers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no land drop for Dylan Murphy means a Spinal Centipede has to be discarded at the end of turn. And you know what? We might just see here a Blaze to the face and attack in.
Oh.
Oh, my God.
16 damage uncounterable. That's something.
Smash. And I mean, the Cyclops here is just, this is too flavorful. Coming in with a big 1-2 punch. Dylan Murphy down to 4 out of nowhere. That was sweet. All right, a land drop, but it's running a lot of gates, and here's one of the drawbacks you mentioned, Reed. It comes in tapped.
Yeah, it looks like any instant or sorcery will allow Sang to win this turn.
And here's a quasi-duplicate.
So he's probably going to want to target his, well, I was thinking target the erratic Cyclops, and then it would require multiple removal spells for Dylan to, keep up with this. But pretty clear Dylan had nothing since he didn't take an action to defend himself last turn. So
Gabriel saying picking up that game, tying things up at 1 game apiece in the match versus Dylan Murphy and his sweet 5-color deck that unfortunately did not come together in the draw like he had hoped.
Boy, this is how it goes so often in Limited with these decks. You see one game where everything goes great, they hit their colors, they're casting all these powerful spells, and then one game where, this is not really the way I planned it out.
Right. But that was cool to see Sang's deck really, really do what it wanted to do, especially with those pair of Cyclops on the table, which is just kind of thing about Izzet. It's like, so, I mean, one has Defender, can't do anything. One has 0 power. Like, why should you worry about us? Oh, wait. 1 minute later, Inescapable Blaze. Boom, you're down to 4.
Yeah, and it was a little bit of a tricky situation because so many of the instants and sorceries that Sang could have played would be creature removal spells. So if Dylan Murphy's not playing creatures, then you're sort of stuck.
Sure.
But Inescapable Blaze, this giant burn spell that can, in fact, target the opponent, it's perfect for the situation. And against an opponent who's not putting up much of a fight, it's closes the game pretty quickly.
I do love the text on Inescapable Blaze, too. This spell can't be countered. I mean, it is inescapable. Love it. And if I'm sitting in Dylan Murphy's seat, too, you know what card I'm just, like, particularly worried about? Besides everything that I saw happen to me last game.
Is it something else that's uncounterable?
That's correct. Niv Mizzet, which at rare is something that we're seeing a lot more of than, you might expect based on how powerful it is.
Yeah, I said about 2 days ago I'd been drafting online all week, and I hadn't yet played against an Izzet opponent who didn't have Niv Mizzet in their deck.
Right?
Yeah, so I'm starting to get this, like, Pavlovian aversion. Like,
right?
I just get sick to my stomach when my opponent plays an island and a mountain. I'm like, I'm just going to lose to Niv Mizzet again.
I mean, the card is very nearly unbeatable. I mean, you can beat it, but you will do a lot of work to beat it. Your opponent will have drawn cards. I mean, when you're trying to kill it, and pinged your creatures, maybe taking down a few of them in the process.
Yeah, for everything that we said about Murmuring Mystic being difficult to answer, good luck if you're putting Luminous Bonds on Niv Mizzet, because those triggered abilities are too powerful to overcome in any kind of close game. And with 5 toughness, it's hard to answer. And even when you do have the answer, that they get to draw a card and maybe ping off one of your creatures. So Niv Mizzet, there's no real clean answer to it. This is just a card that if your opponent's willing to pay the cost, the demanding mana cost to put it in their deck, it's going to be really strong for them.
Niv Mizzet Perun. Perun, I learned, refers to Niv Mizzet being one of the original signers of the Guild Pact. Little bit of Ravnica flavor for you there.
Yeah, he's one of the only ones that's still around.
Yeah.
Although we'll see if Rakdos makes an appearance in one of the future Guilds of Ravnica sets.
There is some flavor text that refers to Rakdos. on Dowser of Lights. And it just got me really excited. I randomly read it the other day and just made me so excited for the next set because Rakdos was my first guild I ever drafted in my very first draft. And I ended up doing really well with it, and it just kind of solidified me for life as a member of the Rakdos clan.
Yeah, actually the first time we visited Ravnica, this was like back when I was a kid, and I was not as competitive as I am now. And
not
I just
as competitive.
I sort of decided that I just really like Rakdos. And even though Rakdos was in the third set, and even though you were sort of supposed to build a 3 or 4 or 5 color deck in that format, I'm like,
really?
you know what? I'm just going to look forward to Rakdos. I'm going to take all the mono red and mono black cards from the first 2 packs, and then I'll get 13 Rakdos cards from the third pack, and that'll be my deck.
Did it work out?
Sometimes. It was risky because you don't know. You're sort of just gambling that you're going to get the right cards in pack 3, but it was a fun strategy, and sometimes you could run people over.
That was kind of my approach to it too when I sat down for my first draft, because I kind of didn't know what I was doing. I kind of did and kind of didn't, and I said, you know what, I like red cards, so I'm going to take red cards, hope I get past them. I'm going to take black cards, pair them together, and it turned out to be really sweet, and Rakdos was super sweet in Return to Ravnica.
I think part of the reason Ravnica has been such a popular plane in the world of Magic, why people love the Ravnica set so much, is that they're great for players of any level.
Right.
Like if you're a newer player and maybe you're only going to draft a couple of times, it's great. You have this sort of direction where you can just choose a guild, you can go with the keyword of that guild, and you can have a good competitive deck and have a lot of fun. But for more advanced players that are going to play a lot, they get to experiment with these cool new things, branching into multicolor combinations, learning from the cross-guild synergies and putting together things in new ways. So there's just a lot of depth to the Ravnica sets, and I think each and every time we've visited the plane, the players have loved it.
Yeah, we just had M19, which is obviously very good for new players as well, but I honestly think that a set like Ravnica, which offers you the guilds as a clear signpost, as clues of how to lead your draft, could even potentially be better for new drafters to help them kind of find their slot when they're making decisions in draft. What guild are you aligned with, Reed?
I used to say Rakdos.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice. All right, so we'll be Rakdos partners in crime here if things start to go awry.
Yeah, we're way better than Marshall and Jake. Those guys are probably like Azorius or something.
Marshall is the most Azorius person I have ever met. What are you, Jake? You're Celestia, of course. Yeah, he concurs. Yeah, no question. So Dylan Murphy here is on the mulligan. And a mulligan, especially when you're playing 5 colors, is even more painful.
Right, sometimes when you start low on resources, it's just really hard to have all the pieces you need, all your lands, your colors of different mana, and the early defense and the late game action. Having all of that when you start with 6 or 5 cards can be difficult.
All right, well, it looks like Dylan Murphy has plenty of land in hand, probably more than he wants, but he's going to kick things off with a Dimir Guildgate here. And Gabe saying plays land past the turn over. Ooh, another land draw for Dylan.
And having too many lands, it's bad, but it may not be as bad in this situation as it sometimes is, because similar to constructed control mirrors, sometimes just nothing really happens in the early turns, or maybe the opponent will play 1 creature and you'll kill it, and then the game will go on for a little while. So just being able to make your land drops and develop your hand, sometimes it will work out. Now, we saw Gabe Sang put the pedal to the metal in game 2 and threaten a pretty quick win. So if that happens again, then Dylan Murphy's hand is going to look pretty ugly. But if nothing happens, then he can be very in this game.
All right, we've got a Spinal Centipede here on turn 3 for Dylan Murphy, and a Whisper Agent is going to flash in for Gabe Sang and give him a Surveil here as well. Man, if this Spinal Centipede was a 2-3, A+. I guess it was meant to die to distribute its +1/+1 counter.
Spinal Centipede, another example of these Golgari-esque creatures where you just play them, you're happy to trade off, you get a little bit of value here and there, and then you fill your graveyard for later.
All right, so the trade, in fact, did happen here, and Erratic Cyclops hits the table for Sang.
And I saw Dylan Murphy pick up Artful Maneuver. It's a card that gives -2, -4, but he's going to need 2 of those if he wants to take care of this Erratic Cyclops.
All right, well, Pitiless Gorgon has Death Touch here for Murphy. The Cyclops does have Trample, but yeah, Artful Takedown, just an all-star in Demir.
Definitely. And actually, although this can't kill Erratic Cyclops, anything that taps a creature at instant speed, I've found to be really powerful against Izzet, the Erratic Cyclops and the Piston Fist Cyclops, because the Izzet player has to dedicate some kind of resource in their pre-combat main phase in order to make those Cyclopses able to attack.
Sure.
And then you can really ruin their day if you just tap their team and say, yeah, try again next turn.
Yeah, that's a great point. Oh, it looks like we might be making a copy of the Cyclops, and in fact, we are.
This could be setting up for a very big turn a little while down the road.
All right, Quasi-Duplicate makes 2 Erratic Cyclopses, and remember, this card has Jumpstart, so we could be making a 3rd. I'm imagining the Izzet factory where this is happening, or whatever, lab. Seems pretty horrifying. Fire Urchin, the follow-up play for Gabriel.
I guess it depends what you're quasi-duplicating. Like if it was, if you had like a kitten in each one of those chambers, it would not be that terrifying.
Generous Stray would be adorable to duplicate.
But the Erratic Cyclops is a bit more intimidating. I probably wouldn't want to be anywhere near there.
For sure. All right, so we have managed to acquire almost all of our colors of mana for Dylan Murphy. So let's see if he can pull up, as it were, the Crashing Plane here. There's another Spinal Centipede. And 2 mana left open, passes back over to Gabe. Life totals both still at 20.
So the card I'm really looking for from Sang's position is a removal spell, an instant or sorcery way to kill that Pitiless Gorgon, because not only would that clear the way for the Cyclopses, but it would also pump their power. Yeah, I mean, Inescapable Blaze, we saw it pointed directly at Dylan Murphy last game, but even if you kill a blocker with that, you're giving +6/+0 to 2 of your creatures that have trample nonetheless. So anything like this, an expensive instant or sorcery that can kill an opposing blocker, is going to be game-changing.
All right, we're going to jumpstart here, Quasi-Duplicate. Oh, or are we? Oh, excuse me, yeah, Dylan Murphy does have all 5 colors.
So Gabe, rethinking that, usually in Tournament Magic, you're not committed to playing your spell until you've paid all the costs for it. So sometimes if you have a moment where you're like tap and untap your mana, the judge will rule in your favor that, yeah, you can rethink it, take a little more time. So that's what's going to happen with Gabe. He is going to elect to, it's not Inescapable Blaze, but Command the Storm. Really nice here.
Wow.
Generating +11 power on his team and taking out the only blocker that could have traded with one of these Cyclopses.
Just a massive swing here for Gabe Sang, and the Spinal Centipede has to trade off with the Fire Urchin, and it doesn't get to distribute its counter because there are no creatures left. Boom, Dylan Murphy down to 10 off of 1 attack.
So we do know that Murphy has at least Artful Takedown, which can buy a little bit of time, tap one of these Cyclopses, but that's not really what he wants here, especially when you can expect Sang's worst play. The worst thing that can happen this turn, or I mean the least threatening thing that can happen this turn, is that he just jumpstarts Quasi-Duplicate.
Right.
That's on the board. So Dylan Murphy, he's got to be in panic mode here, thinking he's got to mount some kind of defense, or else these pumpable Cyclopses are just going to run him down.
And with all of the mana available too, Sang does need to consider the instant speed removal that we saw from Dylan Murphy in game number 1 too, if he was even considering using quasi-duplicate. Gateway Plaza here, we're going to pay 1 for it. Always remember to pay your 1, kids. Land left in hand for Sang, as well as one other card.
Fascinating, that Gateway Plaza is actually off the sideboard for Gabe Sang.
Really?
So that makes me wonder if he brought in an off-color card for the matchup, which we did talk about sideboarding, knowing that the game is going to go long, and that you want to have every advantage you possibly can in a drawn-out game.
I think I know what it is, and it's the card he has in hand, which I believe is Integrity Intervention.
Oh, wow. So that would be effectively Lightning Helix, right?
Yep. Lightning Helix on one side and +2/+2 on the other.
That would be enough on the board. 3 damage to the opponent, give both my Cyclopses +4/+0. If Dylan doesn't have anything to defend himself, Sang could choose to go for the win. So one thing that we might see is Gabe start by declaring his attack step, which that's a good habit to get into whenever you're facing a Dimir opponent with open mana, because you do want to put the test to them if they want to use their Artful Takedown and tap one of your creatures. And yeah, that's what happened. Gabe is attacking with 0 power Cyclopses. So this is really nice heads-up play where he makes sure he gets to declare them as attackers before casting his instant.
Yeah, boom, there's Intervention. 3 damage to any target, you gain 3 life. It's going to buff up those Cyclopses there to 6.
So this is masterful play if you're watching at home. These subtleties, the difference between Gabe just starting his turn by casting the intervention and declaring his attackers first, that's the difference between Dylan Murphy being able to use Artful Takedown to good effect or not being able to use it at all. So pay attention to these details at home. Think about what your opponent could have and navigate your spell as you're sequencing the best way to make things most inconvenient on the opponent.
Yeah, sometimes it's a game of inches that turn out to be miles. In this case, tiny little decisions that can swing the game in one way or another. And I often find myself having been, I'm going to use the word lazy about my play, you know, and realizing that I could have won 2 turns ago or something like that if I just had paid better attention and played more carefully.
Sometimes we get into bad habits, Maria. I think people that spend a lot of time playing on Magic Online or Arena, where it's like, I just want to play and play and play and get in as many games as I can. You sort of just do things on autopilot. But when you get ready for a Grand Prix tournament or anything that you care a lot about your proficiency and want to bring the best, if you want to be the best player you can be, having this attention to detail is very important.
How carefully do you play when you're playing online?
I've always been an advocate for
practice
quality,
like you play?
Quality over quantity. Precisely, yeah. Practice like you play. And I think there's a time and a place for trying to get a lot of games in really quickly, but developing those bad habits is a real threat, and I would rather focus on making sure that I'm always playing tight and being present in the games. And you learn more that way too. If you're really tuned into what's going on, you understand better why you're winning and losing. So I certainly would say quality over quantity when you're practicing for Magic tournaments.
Artful Takedown here is able to save Dylan Murphy's life for a single turn after a quasi-duplicate on the jumpstart. Copies that Cyclops once again, but now Gabriel Sang is untapping with both of them. And there's a Beacon Bolt in hand. And here it is. Beacon Bolt.
Deal some damage to my own Cyclopses.
Doesn't matter. There's a handshake. Gabe Sang takes down this match in round 3, 2-1 over Dylan Murphy. So is it the Is It League getting it done here in exactly the way that Is It likes to do it, spectacular fashion? That was pretty cool, Reed.
Yeah, that was great. It looked kind of grim for Gabe Sang after game 1. Dylan Murphy's deck was very powerful, very well suited to a slow blue mirror. but he stumbled a little bit. You sort of forecasted it in game 1 that 5-color mana base could get you into trouble if your draw doesn't cooperate. And that's what happened, and the punishing nature of the erratic Cyclopses and Quasi-Duplicate too. We've seen that card do good work for multiple of our players on camera so far. But yeah, is it getting the job done? Looking good so far.
Great stuff. Well, we've got more Magic for you. Don't go anywhere.